Hello and welcome to Grody and Unprofessional. My name is Justin McMenemy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. In this episode, we cover topics spanning from the plights of the dipstick engineer to famous quotes Abraham Lincoln never said. Welcome to the fifth installment of my survey of Kelly Johnson's 14 Rules of Management. Kelly Johnson's rules, authored in the 1950s and maintained over the last 7 decades, are the governing principles of an organization set apart. The organization, known as SkunkWorks, is allowed to operate differently than its parent company Lockheed Martin, in large part because the unique culture and processes of SkunkWorks have proven fertile ground for the development and commercialization of cutting-edge technology. My aim in these episodes is to overlay 2 decades of product development experience with Kelly Johnson's list of management rules. The first half of my career experiences were collected within an organization cast in the mold of most modern, world-cost, process-governed, metrics-driven companies. In stark contrast are stories collected from a decade in which I and a tight-knit group of leaders ran an ag tech company called Precision Planting. Much in the same way as SkunkWorks within Lockheed, Precision Planting was a division set apart, with the mission of developing and commercializing cutting-edge technology. We therefore sought to emulate SkunkWorks' culture and creativity described by Kelly Johnson's management rules. In this episode, we focus on the process and politics of product scoping and spec creation. The 10th rule of management states, specifications must be agreed to well in advance, including clearly stating which military specifications will knowingly not be complied with. This rule is clearly aimed at 2 targets. First and foremost, Johnson challenges his team to clearly define the scope of work well in advance of project initiation. For those that have spent a life in product development, there are few pains greater than repeatedly revisiting the question of, what product are we aiming to develop? If goals and objectives continuously creep, the development team is often left wasting precious time and resources chasing a moving target. The obvious solution is to properly scope and define the project prior to beginning work. A properly defined and aligned project scope, budget, and timeline provides invaluable organizational bedrock on which to stand. It is from these documents that individual, departmental, and organizational success can be measured. It is from these documents that future change requests can be properly submitted, vetted, and prioritized. A properly developed and communicated project specification is critical to ensuring expectations are set and therefore can be met. The second and more provocative aim of the 10th rule is to be uncomfortably honest with the customer in advance of starting a project. The SkunkWorks customer was nearly always a branch of the military, a department of the government. Therefore, bureaucratic oversight, regulation, and processification were assumed, even required, on each SkunkWorks project. Johnson is telling his team, and more importantly the government, that SkunkWorks will not follow every military mandated specification. While SkunkWorks will be forthright in sharing which specification they will and will not be following, thoughtless compliance to every specification in the request should not be expected. For those familiar with Elon Musk's 5-step algorithm to cut bureaucracy, Kelly Johnson's 10th rule sounds eerily similar to Musk's first step: question every requirement. SkunkWorks history provides several examples in which customary product specifications were willfully ignored in order to attain a higher level product objective. For example, in order for the SR-71 Blackbird to attain the airspeed of 3 times the speed of sound, the body design required that the fuel tanks must be nearly empty every time the plane takes off. Meaning, every SR-71 flight in history has required mid-air fueling immediately after takeoff and prior to the mission. This same plane had engines that leak oil onto the tarmac as the plane taxis. Ordinarily a sign of engine problems, these leaks represent another instance of an ignored specification. Metallic components swell as they heat, and traveling at supersonic speeds causes a lot of heat. Therefore, the engines were designed to leak oil while the plane was on the ground, but the leaks stopped as the engines heated up during flight. These and others are examples of just how narrow the engineering design window was for the projects undertaken by SkunkWorks, and therefore the need for clear expectations to be set up front with the government to protect against scope creep, budget overruns, and later accusations of unmet expectations. There has been ample written on the importance of discovering and clearly defining product specifications, timelines, and budgets prior to initiating product development activities. Executives are emboldened by famous quotes from the likes of Abraham Lincoln. "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." Or Benjamin Franklin, "If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail." Leadership preaches and organizations are built on the belief that preparation is the singular predictor of success. Therefore, unforeseen obstacles can only be attributed to a lack of preparation. As a result, most large organizations employ a stage gate product development process in which a specification, budget, and timeline must be signed off by all departments at the onset of the program. Brief editor's note: Lincoln never said it. Anyone that has ever taken part in the initial phase of a product scoping exercise within a large company knows the roller coaster. Initially, there's excitement of getting to work on something new. Typically, the executive sponsor hosts a kickoff event where a vision of the future is cast. The team then breaks into working sessions where each department is asked to perfectly predict the future. How many resources will it take to complete the project? How long will each step take? What interdependencies do you foresee? At this point in the dance, any objection or concern raised by the participants is met with, "Well, just assume that you have all the resources you need." Oh, the fools that fall for that one. As the great Admiral Akbar once said, "It's a trap." It is in the transition from the inspirational to the practical that the emotional state of the participants change. Veterans have known all along, and rookies come to realize they are likely authoring their own death warrant. In exchange for the prestige of sitting at the negotiating table, each participant will later be indiscriminately measured against these predictions, absent the underlying assumptions. Marketing will be held to their definition of a product which they said would dominate the unknowable market of the future. Engineering will be held to their time and budget estimates, despite countless voiced known unknowns and a myriad of Rumsfeldian unknown unknowns. Sales must commit to a forecast for a product which has yet to be developed and will be sold into the unknown marketplace of the future. Savvy department leads, knowing the output of this exercise will be etched in stone and quickly become an unamendable contract by which personal success is determined, move to the only rational posture for situations like this: become wishy-washy, vague, and non-committal. The process of spending 4 hours to sharpen the axe is rapidly derailed by personal motivations to maintain the relative safety of sandbagging with the clear desire of avoiding the axe. Why is this? In practice, project approval documents are later weaponized. The complexities of predicting the future and the realities of emerging information are discounted with time. In the years to come, commercial organizations, when asked why a product is not selling according to initial forecasts, will accuse engineering of using too much time to develop a product that costs too much and is not competitive in the market. Conversely, engineering, when asked why product quality and cost issues persist, will accuse the commercial organizations of over-constraining the technical solution in the initial specification. All this sandbagging and finger-pointing is to avoid the blame and shame which must be distributed when predictions don't come true. In pursuit of efficient, rational, and aligned progress, organizations have inadvertently introduced corporate behavioral norms which directly act to impede progress. The first is the rigorous pursuit of being a metrics-driven organization. This pursuit leads to the proliferation of discipline and department-specific metrics, which invariably causes an over-constrained system. In nearly every instance in which a change is requested in a metrics-driven organization, the change acts to advance one departmental metric at the risk of backsliding another. In this over-constrained environment, individuals are tempted and often compensated to prioritize departmental metrics over missional success. A common arrow aimed internally at a department requesting reprieve from a previous projection is the age-old, just do what you said you would do. I have yet to see how the cloak and dagger debate, in which what's good for the customer is merely a thinly veiled argument to protect departmental metrics, leads to the efficient and timely deployment of company resources. The second pervasive mindset, which leads to the weaponization of the spec, is the presumption of ease. The presumption of ease is when a given discipline assumes every other role in the company is vastly easier than their own. You can smell the presumption of ease when you hear someone say, all they do is, or why don't they just? In many places, the presumption of ease is so deeply entrenched in the culture, it goes largely unnoticed. Engineers assume that all well-designed products sell themselves, and salespeople just play golf and dine on the company card. Operations assumes that engineers work 9 to 5 and only worry if their product works in the lab, but don't care what happens in the real world. A logical extension of the presumption of ease is the presumption of guilt. When you believe that everyone else has it easier than you, the first assumption for an issue within another discipline is that they were asleep at the wheel, that they should have seen it coming, or that if they were at all competent in their job, none of this would have ever happened. This is the salesman calling the head of purchasing during a global microchip crisis and saying, why don't you just offer the suppliers to pay for expedited shipping? This is the engineer asking the salesman if they have thought about offering a discount on the product to improve sales. In organizations where the presumption of ease extends to the presumption of guilt, often a general unwillingness to put in extra effort or to be flexible in a crisis emerges. The logic goes, the other department was obviously the cause of the issue and should have prevented the problem or at least seen it coming. Therefore, it is my duty to ensure they are held accountable for their mistake. Otherwise, they'll never learn their lesson. Having worked inside several organizations which sought to be world-class in their discipline and rigor toward defining and maintaining initial project business cases, it is my experience that even the best intentions led to massive inefficiencies and wasted efforts. I worked for a season designing diesel engines for mining equipment. The combustion engine is likely one of the most researched and optimized machines invented by mankind. As a result, making incremental improvements on more than a century of research and development is very difficult. A given engine development program could easily exceed $10 million. Therefore, before a project was initiated, a detailed specification and scope of work had to be signed off by a core executive team. Once approved, this document was treated as an internal contract, which each department lead was held to and measured against. On one program in particular, marketing sought to grow share through aggressive improvements along several customer value metrics. Things like fuel economy, oil change interval, and in this instance, a significant increase in high altitude capability for the machine and the engine. For those unfamiliar with engines, most simply, an engine needs fuel, air, and a spark to work. A decrease in either fuel or air leads to poor engine performance. Anyone that has hiked in the mountains knows there is less and less air as you go higher. The same lack of air that makes it difficult to breathe in the mountains also makes it difficult to design engines that work high in the mountains. This machine in particular was used by copper and gold miners among the world's highest mountain ranges. The hope was that by increasing the altitude capability of the engine, more machines would be sold. From the beginning, the engine performance team highlighted that this specification was going to be difficult to attain. However, the commercial team held the political high ground, so the spec was locked in at the higher altitude. For months, the engineering team struggled to design an engine that could make power in the thinner air of the new specification. Under the presumption of ease and presumption of guilt doctrines, engineering knew the barrier to changing the spec was high, as the organization would assume that engineering was merely complaining rather than innovating. As a result, a great deal of both technical and political effort was required to build a caucus around the conversation of relaxing the spec. You can't just ask marketing the cost of changing the spec at the water cooler. The business demands a full understanding of the forecast, market share, financial, and brand impacts caused by a change like this. As no one person understands the full business impact of a spec relaxation, and nobody wants to sign up for the risk of being wrong if the relaxation does in fact cost the company profit, no one is equipped or even desires to make the decision. After much effort, frustration, and delays, engineering finally felt that they had enough data and analysis to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there were no feasible means of adding 1,000 feet to the engine's altitude capability. They had built their case to the point that they believed that they could overcome both the presumption of ease and the presumption of guilt that the rest of the organization would assume of them. A meeting of the minds was set in which engineering would go before an executive core team and formally request a deviation to the specification. In the meeting, the simple and mundane question was asked: which high-altitude mines are you guys targeting with the new specification? Or otherwise stated, who owns a copper or gold mine above the current altitude spec? The reply was, we're not aware of anyone. We just felt that the customer would like to see an increase in the spec. Marketing's desire to improve the product's competitiveness, just in case, inadvertently led to engineering spending months of time and hundreds of thousands of dollars chasing a feature that no customers would utilize. My point here is not that marketing should have known enough engineering to understand that altitude performance was highly difficult to attain, or that engineering should have a list of every alpine copper mine. But it is to say, highly wasteful efforts can take place when product development projects are governed by a document negotiated by departmental partisans with incomplete understanding of the present and zero ability to foreknow the future. The presumption of perfection in the initial predictions and the presumption of guilt of anyone that requests a modification in light of emerging realities combined to create a cocktail of waste in this and many other development projects. An organization must maintain agility and adaptability in the process of discovery, not only as a means of adapting to an ever-changing marketplace, but as a hedge against lengthy periods of waste. One other example of rigid specifications leading to massive waste came during another engine program at the same company. In a new product scoping meeting, the topic of dipsticks came up. For those of you unfamiliar, a dipstick is a simple device. It's a stick that can be dipped down into an engine oil pan, allowing a person to easily check if an engine has the proper amount of oil. During this meeting, an executive expressed his frustration that the engine factory was installing dozens of different dipstick versions across hundreds of engine configurations that we supplied. From the end of the table, he declared in no uncertain terms, there will be one dipstick on the new engine platform. As with hierarchical organizations, only a suicidal maniac would dare bring to light the implications of such a declaration once the leader's fist hits the table. Over the next year, hundreds of presentations and thousands of engineering hours were spent attempting to achieve the single dipstick demand. As in the engine altitude example, what seems obvious to one discipline is nearly impossible for another. It's easy to procure and install a single dipstick on the engine line. It's quite another thing to design 50 vehicles around the engine which allow the customer to reach the one dipstick that rules them all. When presented with this market reality, the engineering manager demonstrated all three wasteful derivatives of the modern spec process. In the metrics-driven organization, he was measured by the simplicity of his factory operations and had little care for the downstream impact on the other factories, as well as his belief in the presumption of ease of running downstream factories, and therefore the presumption of guilt that they weren't smart enough to figure out how to accommodate this simple request. He replied, "Tell the vehicle teams to change the vehicles to fit the only dipstick." The political equivalent of putting your fingers in your ears and shouting, "I can't hear you." You can imagine how well that went. More meetings, more presentations, more water cooler conversations, more political jockeying. The organization had been thrust into a civil war by a single-minded executive declaration. After months of infighting, threats of escalation, and political posturing, a Congress of leaders were convened to debate the issue. Both sides brought well-prepared, read costly, and well-rehearsed business cases and defenses for their positions. In one of the most politically minded middle fingers I have witnessed in a corporation, the fist-pounding executive first feigned that he didn't remember making the declaration, and second flippantly said, "I really just wanted to reduce the number of dipsticks and thought the only way anything would happen is to tell the org that we could only have one." Unbelievable to me is the immeasurable volumes of time, capital, energy, and collaborative spirit wasted by a throwaway executive comment which froze the almighty and unquestioned spec. For those that didn't follow or don't care about the previous example, one thing that you can learn from this story is that every engine company in the world has someone whose title is dipstick engineer. Having spent time with more than a few dipstick engineers in my career, I will let you know it's harder than you might think. Please, please don't fall into the presumption of ease trap on this one. A decade into my career, I transitioned to an organization which chose to run the specification and product development processes very differently. The most succinct way to delineate the difference is that while most organizations have an extremely high level of confidence that they are working on the right thing and that their plans are correct and will be executed perfectly, we also were confident. We were confident that the plan and the specification is a representation of the world as we understand it today. And as the world is dynamic, more than likely, perfect execution of the plan is not only impossible, but potentially wasteful considering new information. In light of our belief, rather than spending time chastising people for not delivering the plan, we spent much of our time hunting for information which would most directly impact the plan. We valued flexibility over standard work. We looked at the market, the competition, and technology with constant curiosity, checking our previous assumptions against an evolving reality. We lived according to the wise words of the great philosopher Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Despite holding the view that the initial spec was flawed rather than infallible, many of the initial steps of scoping and initiating a project were similar. Like all, we started a project by considering the potential size of the market, the likely cost of goods of the final product, the likely amount that we would be able to charge for the product, and the amount of effort and time required by various departments to bring the product to market. The key difference is that we used words like likely and potential. We weren't simply pulling numbers out of our keister, but we weren't seeking alignment on our assumptions to the third decimal place either. We knew a fast estimate, informed by experience, is often more useful than the heady output of a politically charged debate seeking alignment before action. With our understanding of the market, technology, and the overall cost of the problem we hope to tackle for the customer, we would pencil out a project net present value. If the napkin math was compelling, we would send out a sprint team to chase down the highest risk, most exposed aspects of our assumed business case. This might entail customer interviews, technology evaluations, market studies, or any number of other inputs into the napkin math. As the sprint team either proved or disproved components of the business case, resources were allocated to the project in proportion to the confidence that we had in the business case and the size of the opportunity. This approach, when applied to derivative works of existing products or product launches into known markets, would often result in initial business cases and timelines that were very close to the resulting reality. One may ask, okay, so then how different really is this approach? The real difference occurred on projects in which it was impossible to foreknow the market, the technology, the customer value, or the timeline. Projects like this die on the vine in large organizations. The risk is too great that a negative outcome could occur, leaving one or more departments holding a stinky bag of goo. The risk of embarrassment or blame makes the needed upfront commitment and alignment impossible for projects like this. Many executives have made a great living inside large organizations, stopping the insanity of projects like this from ever seeing the light of day. We, however, viewed projects that had unknowable outcomes as the single greatest opportunity to demonstrate thought leadership in the market, to advance the market to the benefit of the customer and the affirmation of our brand as a trusted advisor. Our ability to take on projects in spaces that no other company in the industry would dare tread allowed us in many ways to set the pace of the industry. We didn't fundamentally treat mostly known and mostly unknown outcome projects differently. In either case, we believed that organizations most able to adapt to emerging information are likely to stay at the head of the pack. Therefore, we built an ecosystem which tolerated and even expected the business case calculus to evolve over the course of a project. As these recalculations were expected, there was no presumption of guilt placed on the one who discovered the information which caused us to change plans, any more than one would punish a forward scout for relaying accurate intel on the placement of enemy troops. In accord with the expectation of recalculation, we streamlined the process of bringing new information to light. The first person to discover an issue with the current path should not be burdened with months of staff work and political jockeying before they are listened to. As Warren Buffett says, in order to be a good investor, you need to make two good decisions. The first on the day you buy, and the second on the day you sell a given stock. We had the same view of a project's initial unknowable nature. If the project prospectus is high, we invest. If the fundamentals of the investment erode or our understanding of the market shifts, the best day to get out is as soon as you realize your assumptions were wrong. A couple questions often emerge when considering the above strategy. First, how do you guarantee a steady flow of products to the market if you have known fallout in your product pipeline? The answer was no different for us than for a mutual fund manager. She knows from the start some of the companies selected will bust. Some will boom, and most will be meh. While that does not support the employment of a dartboard selection process, it does support investment parallelization, selecting multiple companies simultaneously to invest in. We did the same thing. We regularly had between 10 and 15 projects actively being developed at any given time. Based on averages, we knew that 3 to 5 of them were going to fall out, either because the business case eroded or in some instances, another far more strategically valuable opportunity emerged. The next question pokes at the perceived cost of parallel paths. With tight budgets, overloaded engineering resources, and current project overruns, how can someone justify the cost and distraction of adding more projects? The answer is vigilance, to drive down both the cost and time of iteration. In my experience, a significant category of wasted time and effort flows from hierarchical decision-making. The burden placed on staff to educate, inform, and seek approval from professional, non-technical managers that are often geographically distant from the action is incalculable. Professional, non-technical managers are a painful point source of busy work, approvals, recurring meetings, status presentations, and reviews. One of my greatest professional pet peeves is the standard format one-sheeter review meeting. The rationale is always that the leader needs a consistent format to understand and compare one project to another. To me, this is simply a signal that a leader is disconnected from the details and therefore should not be involved in the decision. As we close on Rule 10 of Kelly Johnson's Rules of Management and the 5th episode in this series, I agree with Kelly Johnson. Any organization bigger than a handful of people must put effort into documenting the mission, documenting what we plan to do. Alignment on what the company is trying to accomplish is an important ingredient of success. A company cannot have each departmental head independently deciding what is best for the customer. However, in my experience, a single aligned product specification, if treated improperly, can cause just as much counterproductive behavior as the chaos the spec hopes to prevent. An organization which aspires to hold leaders accountable through strict metrics-based assessment grooms leaders unwilling to take risks, unwilling to stretch beyond what is guaranteed. Any organization which presumes guilt or incompetence of those that highlight emerging flaws in previous thinking are destined to organizational rigor mortis in which strategies long outlive their usefulness. In metrics, in specs, and in most facets of business, the best positioned companies are the ones that strike the balance between structure and flexibility, metrics visibility, and situational elasticity. For those that wish to share comments, praises, or large sums of money, you can reach me at justin@grody.io. For those with complaints, concerns, frustrations, or accusations, just remember the wise words of our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. You can't believe everything you hear on the internet. Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.